Welcome. I'm Scott Breslin of the Plant Network. We're a community of people all across Europe who long to see vibrant communities of Jesus followers among the least reached. And today I'd like to invite you to a special conversation between three Danish Christian leaders who discuss the topic, what is God up to in Denmark? Thank you for joining us on this discussion. And I wonder if Flemming, Keld, and Helle, you would just go around and introduce yourself. Helle, why don't you go first?
Thank you, Scott. My name is Helle. I am a mother of 3 daughters and I have a husband called Carsten. I am working with OM as a field leader and also together with my family planting a church on a small island in Denmark.
Thank you. Flemming.
Yes, I'm married to Anne. We live in a village 50 minutes from Copenhagen. We have 5 children. We are heavily involved in Copenhagen Vineyard and also working in the Vineyard Nordic Fellowship, Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Denmark. Yes, I think that's about it.
Thank you. Kjell.
Yeah, I'm Kjell. I live in Aarhus in Denmark, a typical European university city. And I'm married to Sarah. We have 4 children. I have been involved as a pastor here in a church for years. And I also work with a national network of churches who are pursuing mission and development together. And I work with something called the Order of Mission, which is a global network of missional leaders.
Well, thank you. My first question is I wonder if you could give us a little bit about the context of the church in Denmark. How big is it? What is its influence? What are the challenges?
I could perhaps begin and say that an average attendant in the church, an average churchgoer, a churchgoer that are practicing faith, going regularly to church, would count between 1.5 to 2% in Denmark if you count all churchgoers in the state church and the free churches. At least in Copenhagen, we found out that half of those who are going regularly to church comes from the state church and the other half from the free church. If you look at the free churches in Denmark, you would find that 50% of the churches are more or less growing, primarily because they are contemporary churches being established within the last 30, 40 years, whereas 25% of the free churches are stagnating and 25% are declining. It's interesting that a new research has shown that between young people in the age from 22 to 35, that actually 20% of the Danish population in that age group are spiritual practitioners, which means that they've been seeking God or praying or spiritual practice in some form or shape. And that even on top of that, 30% in that age group are defined as spiritually open, whereas 50% in that age group are dismissing the spiritual aspect. And that's very, very interesting, I think, to see those numbers of people who are spiritually interested and a very, very low number of people actually being active in a church.
Helle, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, encouraging some of it and discouraging some of it. I find it important for the picture that we have been a Christian country for 1,000 years and a Lutheran country since the 16th century. So a lot of our culture has been, or the whole culture has been influenced by Christianity and our values. So when we try to have conversations with people outside of the church, then it means something that we can actually speak together out of a common Christian background. But it's also very obvious that we are now very secularized. Our children, they don't learn about Christianity in school. Many of them would probably know very, very little about the gospel. And 75% of the population say that they never or almost never go to church. So now faith is very private, and it's almost a taboo for many people to talk about faith. But lately, I think we have seen some famous people or people who are known be more open about their faith, and that is very interesting and inspiring. Actually, it's like Christianity or faith is coming in the back door. It's not because of the church. It's not because the church has been reaching out to them. It's because of their own crisis, or they have been spiritual seeking. So that's influence. So I would say we have a very Christian kind of value system, but at the same time very secularized in our way of living, and very private about our faith.
Thank you. Kjell.
Yeah, I mean, following up on what Helle just shared, I agree with her. And I think another way to say it is that for many Danish people, they will say, I'm a Christian because I'm Danish, or the two go together. It's being a Christian is a cultural identification marker, and a way of saying I'm not a Muslim or some. Yeah, so it's a way of belonging to this nation. And fascinating enough, 75% never goes to church, but 75% are still members of the Danish State Church and pays their church tax. And again, this means that the typical thinking of belong, believe, behave does not link together in Denmark like it does in other countries. There are lots of sociology of religion who does not really fit the paradox we have in Denmark of, in one way, being a very secular country, very liberal, and in some ways post-Christian, and on the other hand have this huge state church that people decide to stay in as members. Almost a kind of spiritual insurance to some extent, I think it can be for people. And lots of people bring their children for infant baptism. Almost 70% of young people in the year of when they're 14 years old will go for confirmation in the state church and have some training, some kind of teaching Christianity. So there are also lots of opportunities for engaging and living faith communities in the state church to engage with the population through that. But it's a complex situation. I'm part of the Lutheran State Church here, but in a church who operates independent of the parish church structure. So we are not linked to a specific parish. We are, in a way, you can say we are kind of a missional state church in a way. So we find ourselves very much in the sweet spot between, and I'm a column writer for the newspaper, and I'm not so sure I would be a column writer here if I wasn't in the state church. There's some. It's almost like the state church can, in some places, be a brand of it can give you a right to speak to some extent in the culture. But on the other hand, it can also be some people have said that the state church, the way the state church functions, is a vaccine against discipleship, because it gives people a little bit of faith or connection. They're not really inviting them into a journey to become followers of Christ. So I think it's a complex matter, but it's definitely part of our missional context here to understand that complexity and that dynamic.
That's an interesting complexity. So what are some of the challenges of disciple making in Denmark? I find it interesting that somewhere between 1.5% and 2% of the population attend church, yet at least 75% identify as Christian. That's very interesting. Maybe you could speak on that, or speak on the idea of what are the challenges that you face?
I think it's quite clear that there is a clear distinction between people's needs and what we can offer as vibrant communities. It lacks connection somehow. That's a huge challenge. How to make that connection. Adding to the picture Kjell and Helle was describing in terms of spirituality in Denmark, a church background, I think that the Danes we are high on education, high on trust for the politicians, but we are probably a bit skeptical when it comes to religion, conceptual religion. And therefore, every time a free church and others will try to express themselves, they are challenged to define themselves in all of this. And in general, if we really live out our faith in Jesus, we have some explaining to do, I believe. What I think really Denmark needs in order to establish a connection about the spiritual needs is that the church becomes more radical, that followers of Jesus actually becomes the church more than we already are. And by that I mean, instead of excusing ourselves, we should define ourselves. We should define what we can offer. We should live out our faith, praying for people, engaging in their practical needs, offer ourselves as families in the local context. I think we should challenge ourselves not to play it too safe, but we should invest our families to live out faith exactly where we are. And I think that's what I've thought a lot about during this season of Corona, that this is the opportunity to be the church where we actually live. So I've tried to share a slogan in our church and within the churches of Denmark, Nordic, that, how could you ever leave your home without thinking you're being sent to someone? How could you ever consider going to the supermarket without being consider that God has sent you to someone? So, I mean, being a follower of Jesus means that you have an open home, that your floors will be worn out because new people enter your home. You would invest yourselves in it. I think that's what we need. And then, of course, to express that in planting new churches, which I'm very passionate about.
If I can just add to that, Flemming, I agree very much in that. I think that the church, many churches, it's hard, it's wrong to generalize, but I think that because we have to defend ourselves all the time, and we are not a sect, or we are not just crazy or old-fashioned. Then we spend a lot of our energy to defend ourselves and to protect the members and make them happy, make them feel okay, and try to not lose anybody, because of course that's a threat all the time. Or are we losing the youth? Are we using the kids? Losing them, and it just means that the church can be very inward focused, and I think the danger is that Christian people can have the false impression that being a Christian is to attend a Sunday service show, if I can promote it a bit, and then go home, and then I'm safe. You know, that is what it is to be a Christian, and I think it is task for us as leaders in organizations as OM or churches as Vineyard to really try to raise evangelists and pioneers and apostles who dares to actually go out of the building and go out of the comfort zone and meet people where they are, and not waiting for them to come in and look like us and behave like us and think like us, but actually go out and try to be a Greek for the Greeks, and as Paul is saying, that is that is our challenge in Denmark.
I think that one of the big challenges for the churches is to have a much higher focus on raising leaders who will take new risks and new initiatives, planting new churches. I hope that we as churches in Denmark will be able to challenge ourselves with that in mind. We see that in many of the church I lead has been growing mainly by transfer growth. It's not to say that's bad, because we pursued to have a high focus on raising leaders, and now we're seeing that leaders has emerged from that environment, that church, going out and planted churches many other places in Denmark. So it's not to list two good things as contradiction, but however, the big challenge in Denmark is to plant new churches that actually reach out to people who feel lost, without hope, who are not used to go to church. And let me just mention here that Helle and her husband Karsten has been doing that for a few years on Bornholm, and actually a very, very living and wonderful example of a church actually doing that. We need to see much more of that. We need to see in Europe and Denmark that many more churches are actually reaching out to people in the fringes of our country, not only the bigger cities, but in villages. Hope to see that.
And I think behind what you are saying, Helle and Flemming, is a dynamic reveal that I would call the willing to commitment and the willing to sacrifice. And I mean, if I take the newer church history of the city I'm in here in Aarhus, we are definitely in a much better situation now than 30 years ago in terms of having a bunch of churches who operate in style of music, in way of communication, as relevant for younger people, compared to just traditional churches who just operate by liturgy or in that sense. I think the challenge for us is some of these 50% of because vibrant churches who are growing to some extent and attract new people and find ways of communication and style that works with the times we live in and with the culture. Do we bring sacrifice and commitment into discipleship? I think, I mean, another big dynamic that influences all of us in Denmark is we are part of a welfare society. I think if we take the parable of Jesus in Mark 4, where he describes a different kind of bad soil, I think Jesus describes different cultures. And I think the seed that fell among the thorns, if you remember that place in the parable, Jesus is saying, I just have it here, hear the word, but the worries of this life, the deceitfulness of wealth, and the desires for other things come in and choke the word, making it unfruitful. I would say to a far extent, I think that's a description of some of the challenges we find also as evangelicals in Denmark. I mean, I remember a couple coming to this church saying, we have moved to the city, we studied, now we have our dream jobs, we got our dream jobs, we have our dream children, now we just look for a dream church. And I remember saying to them, please don't attend this church, because this is not a dream church. This is a church that will kill your dreams and call you to discipleship and mission. You know, so I think at the core of what we need to be call people into is also sacrifice and commitment. I'll never forget a conversation I had years ago with Ajit Fernando, who is a great, I would say, apostolic missional leader in the third world on Sri Lanka. And I asked him, when you travel in the church in the West, in the Western world, and he was on our summer conference, what do you see as the biggest challenge for the Western church? And he said, in general, lack of commitment, because you don't live a life where you actually really need to sacrifice. You don't have the poor outside your doorstep. You can, and so I think. But on the good news in this situation is that when I see 3 different, I would say, moves of younger people attracted to church in Denmark, one of them I call the one who really want to serve the poor and the marginalized. I definitely also see that in the vineyard churches where my colleagues here have their ministry. I see young people are attracted to churches who want to make a difference for the poor and the marginalized. I think there is a component where people are actually attracted to make that kind of difference and not just leave it to the state or the municipality. Another stream I would call a cathedral stream. I think the Hillsong movement in many ways represent a way of rebuilding cathedrals spiritually at all the capital cities in Europe. And whether we like their model or not, or find it attractive or not, I think they are doing that very well. They create this big event where I think young people who back in medieval times would have done a pilgrimage to go for a cathedral in Köln or in wherever in the world. I think some of them are attracted. I can see that Hillsong are actually to some extent successful in reaching people with a kind of non-Christian or maybe culture Christian mentality. And the third stream I see is about what I call conversation. The research that Flemming just referred to that was recently done in Denmark with young people in Copenhagen shows that many young people have lots of thoughts, maybe not even more in the pandemic, about existential things and God and spirituality. And they actually would like to discuss that with other people. They would like a conversation about God and faith and, the deeper stuff in life, but they don't necessarily expect the church to be that conversation part. I think that's a good challenge for us, isn't it? I think that what you were touching on, Flemming. So there is God is doing something in our culture, and I'm sure he will. As I know him, he will use the lockdown and the pandemic. He did not bring it, obviously, but he will use it to crack up, I think, things in the typical well-off middle-class society like our society, and in the cracks there will be opportunities for the gospel. I really think that. Yeah.
At one point, I was gonna ask, that Denmark is almost every year is rated number 1 or 2 as the happiest nation in the world, and you kind of spoke to maybe how that somehow affects the church. The happiness may create a complacency. Tell me about like what you see God is up to in Denmark.
As I said before, I mean that 20% in a specific age group are spiritual practitioners, and 30% are very interested and very open. Means that something is going on. I remember when I was a young man and talking about my faith in my little village where I grew up, that was very suspicious. Now these days you can talk openly about your faith. That doesn't mean that people are not skeptical, but it means it's part of it's now a part of the conversation. And
right.
As I think was Helle said, that we see now some famous people coming to faith, expressing their faith. It means that there's a conversation going on, and how can we as churches tap into that? So I think that God is really is challenging us to respond to what's going on in society. And I hope that will mean that we will see many more vibrant missional communities, churches. I think at least that's a little part of it that I'd like to invest in to see happening.
And as a church planter, and now we have been experimenting with this 3.5 years. I think it's also very important to define what is a church plant, because some people think that, I mean, when we came here, some Christian people were visiting us and saying, oh, finally there will be a more trendy church in this area. And we said, we are sorry, that's not it. You are very welcome, but this whole experiment, the reason that we left our jobs and our house and, moved the children and everything here is for one goal, and that is, how can we reach out? How can we meet people who have not heard the gospel or who doesn't know Jesus? And I remember one woman, she was crying because she was so happy that there would be, now a more trendy church for her and her boyfriend. They were young people, they wanted this, and she was crying, sobbing almost. Is this not about us? Is it about the lost? And I said, yes, I'm sorry, that's it. And our gatherings will be about that. Our prayers will be about that. Everything will be about that. And this church plant is not just another church, and then you can, shop between the churches and find your dream church. It's an experiment. It's like a laboratory. So when we meet as leaders in this church, we are, doing our best to find out how can we be relevant to this, to people here. How can we meet them? So, but my point is that a church plant should always have a very missional, I think, a very, very missional vision and understanding of itself. We are going to this city only to reach people, to reach new people, not to be, more charming than the next door church.
So the good thing is that God is doing something outside the church in Denmark. That's a wonderful thing. And now the challenge is, do we want to be a part of it?
Yeah.
Will we respond to that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kjell, do you want to add to that? Kjell?
No, yeah, and I think he is doing something outside the church, and he's also doing something inside the church. As Flemming said, he was very passionate about church planting. I can definitely identify that, knowing Flemming. But I will say it's not just Flemming. There is a growing willingness and interest and optimism also in the evangelical body in Denmark, especially in the free churches, to begin to pursue church planting again. I remember Flemming and I think two other guys met in a restaurant in Aarhus and had a conversation about that, I think 3 or 4 years ago now. And we have begun to gather more and more people in that group who meet once a year about pursuing church planting and again, different kind of church plants. Another thing I see is in the evangelical body is a shared humility. I think most people come not with the approach, this is just the model. We pursue different models, and we identify that God will never move in a country through one stream of church. This is also why I say that in all its some extent stubbornness, the state church I'm part of will also be part of where God is moving for a harvest in this nation. So I see a urgency for church planting again, in different ways of thinking church planting, much more organic or more, as Helle says, build community with the people who are not already in the church instead of just taking people from other churches. I see another level, I think, of humility. Nobody sees himself as the one solution to it all. And I also see young people who, like my children, are growing up now in a more straight out way of secular society, where they do know that it's a decision also to be a Christian. It's not just something that I inherited from my grandparents. So I think, and also in a good way, we are less just leaning in on the culture Christianity as we were, and that has an opportunity to rediscover true Christianity, I think, for many people.
Thank you. Now, I'm trying to keep to our time frame. I wonder if you could address the question, like, who are the unreached in Denmark, and what is the responsibility of the church in Denmark to the least reached?
I think there are some groups in Denmark who are definitely almost unreached, and they are not post-Christian, and that's some of the immigrants. I know the Turkish community in Denmark and in Copenhagen, there are no people reaching out to them, no people planting a Turkish-speaking church. So that is definitely also a task. They are, I would say, unreached, almost unreached, and also other groups of immigrants. But I think it's also interesting to think of our own Danish brothers and sisters or citizens who are also, as you said, Kjell, they are educated and and they know so many things, and still they don't know how Jesus died even. It's not because that is a key question, or it just says a lot. So I would also say many ordinary Danish people are unreached. They didn't have a chance yet.
No, I mean, I find it just fascinating how things pop up as a sign of something happening in context where you wouldn't expect. It's just fascinating how things like that will pop up and change something in the mentality somewhere. And I see that in many different places, but it's very difficult for me to give it like that. I mean, something in me would like to say, this is the thing, let's go for it. But it's more like there are many signs, different places. And definitely everyone who wants can be part of it.
Well, thank you. Can we close by each of you sharing a strategic prayer request for Denmark?
I mean, I have two things. Pray for pray for pioneers. Pray for the people willing, for some reason, willing to plant or to do something, pioneer something new, and then pray for permission givers. The people in the other end who are often like the denominational leaders or the people in authority who need to give the permission and release, and that God will put it on their heart as well.
I think the same prayer request. Actually, I agree on this. Pray for pioneers and evangelists.
Yes, I agree. Some leaders who will move and shake our nation, and that we as an existing church will receive the call of Jesus to follow him in a renewed way, in a way that that will be expressed in our whole life and approach to people around us.
Thank you very much for this time and for allowing others to come in and hear your thoughts and opinions. And it's been a real privilege to sit with you for this half hour. So thank you very much, and may the peace of God fill you and lead you from strength to strength. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, if you enjoyed that conversation, not only like the video and leave a comment, but join us in prayer for the people of Denmark. And if you'd like to get in contact with myself or any of the guests, our contact information is in the description. So until we meet again, may the Lord bless you and fill you with his perfect peace.